All right, so now that you did some review on limited versus unlimited governments, the first style of actual government that we are going to get into is a democracy. The word democracy comes from some Greek words that actually loosely translate to rule by the people. So, democracy really is a form of government in which supreme power is with the people through their ability to elect government representatives and leaders. This first form of government probably began in ancient Athens, Greece around the 5th century BCE. You'll actually learn a lot more about that in 7th grade. But again, democracy means people power in Greek. And at that time, the citizens of Athens would come together to make important decisions for their city state. So on a world map, this is Greece. This is us way over here. But many, many years ago, this form of government was developed there in Greece. Again, you can see a close-up map of Greece. Here's the city-state of Athens. So here's the thing about that first form of democracy. Could anyone living in Athens at that time help make decisions? No. Only landowning men could vote on decisions about laws and government, but that was still a big improvement from previous forms of government in that area where it was pretty much one person making all the decisions. So we've come a long way with democracies. Now, in modern times, power rests with the people. In a democracy, the people have a right to choose and change their government through their power of the vote and political activism, meaning getting out there and being part of that government process. Who has the right to rule in a democracy? The power to rule comes from the citizens who vote for representatives and leaders in fair elections. Citizens may voice their opinions and concerns to those representatives. Leaders attain. That's a word we'll come across many times. That means they get their power through the vote of the citizens and they maintain or keep their power by being reelected at the end of their term. So, in a democracy, the executive, legislative, and judicial powers of government are often broken into separate branches. This is in an effort to keep one group from having too much power. And if you think back to last week's Pear Deck, that Pear Deck kind of went over these different branches in the United States government. This is referred to as a system of checks and balances, and each branch will typically have its own leaders. This is just a little graphic to show you the branches of the U.S. government. And not every democracy has this same setup, but we have our legislative branch, which makes the laws. And this is composed of Congress, which includes the Senate and the House of Representatives. You have your executive branch, which we typically say carries out the laws. And this is where you see your president, vice president, and the cabinet. And then last but not least, you have your judicial branch, which includes the Supreme Court and other federal courts. And that is the branch that evaluates the laws. So what rights or liberties? Liberties mean freedoms do citizens have? Since a democracy is limited, they have a lot. This means that the power of government is limited and how it can treat its citizens is limited by laws. Citizens are protected from harsh and unfair treatment from their own government. When citizens feel that they've been mistreated, they can take their case to court to seek fair treatment. Citizens can express dissent. That word again means disagreement with the government. They can publicly criticize the policies and behaviors of their government without being arrested or harmed. A free press also exists in a democracy. That means the government cannot control the basic content of what news is printed or broadcast. The United States Constitution outlines many of the rights of citizens in the amendments to the U.S. Constitution. In the U.S., these rights include voting, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, right to due process when accused of a crime, protection from cruel punishment, and the right to assemble in groups for the purpose of discussing government actions. Now, along with your rights in a democracy, citizens in every democracy have responsibilities. Probably the most important one is to vote, but not just vote, to be an informed voter. So to know what it is that you're voting for and who you're voting for. Um, Even living in a democracy with lots of freedoms, you still have to obey the laws. If you break the laws, you have to accept the consequences of breaking them. Citizens have to pay taxes. Sorry. So the government has money to provide protection and services. Um, Citizens in a democracy have to serve on a jury when they're called to do so. If you serve on a jury, you go to hear a court case, determine if someone is innocent or guilty. And also, in most democracies, citizens have to enter the military if the government drafts them into service. And that even includes in the United States. Now, that doesn't mean you have to join the military, those are in times of crisis. So this is not something that you will be tested over necessarily, but just some good information to know that there's more than one type of democracy. You have a direct democracy, and this is the type of democracy in which the entire population is involved in voting about a particular leader or a decision. This is somewhat what would have been in Athens, Greece, except it wasn't the entire population voting. But a good example of a direct democracy in action in our country is, let's say you're voting for a local tax levy. You either vote for or against that levy, and your vote goes directly to that issue. You have a representative democracy, and this is a type of democracy in which a group of citizens elect a person, a representative, to speak for them and make decisions in government. This would be more in line with what we have in the United States as a whole. You have a parliamentary democracy, and we do not have this in the United States. Here's a map of the countries that have different forms of parliamentary democracy. And this is the type of democracy in which the elected officials in the legislative branch, so the lawmaking branch, select the leader of the executive branch. And usually that leader is called a prime minister or a chancellor or a premier. And then I want you to think about, when you say the Pledge of Allegiance, you talk about a republic, not a democracy. So technically the United States has a republic. And this is a state in which supreme power is held by the people and their elected representatives. It's very similar to that representative democracy that I just talked about. So in democracies, a leader might be called a president, a prime minister, a chancellor, a premier. This is a picture of Boris Johnson. He's the current British prime minister. So from here, I'm going to show you what's posted in the Google Classroom. I have a website that I made for all of you about democracy. This has the basics. It's very informative. So you're going to want to use this website to get your information. So once you've watched this video, the second thing I want you to do, I want you to go to this website. I want you to read through the information on the website. You can use Google Read and Write. Don't forget about that little purple puzzle piece. There's also a video at the bottom that I want you to watch. Pay attention off to the side. There are words that you should know or be aware of. And once you are finished with that, there's an assignment posted in the Google Classroom called a democracy acrostic. So I'm going to explain that assignment right now. An acrostic is a poem where certain letters in each line spell out a word or a phrase. You've all done these before. You're going to make an acrostic for the government type of democracy. So for each letter of the word democracy, you want to write a phrase or a word that relates to the characteristics of a democracy. You're going to use the information given to you on that website I just showed you and my video that's provided in the Google Classroom to help. Your final product then should be neatly done of hand-drawn and colored. I'd also like you to include 2 pictures that relate to this type of government. Your acrostic may be done on paper, and if you do it on paper, you want to insert a picture on the following slides, or done on this slideshow. Make it digitally. Other ideas for how to create it, contact me. Here's an example though, and this is not a final product. This is just a quick example that I did. So you're going to notice you want to put democracy down your paper, and you want to come up with words or phrases that involve the letters. So maybe you can't think of a word that starts with an E, but you can think of a word that ends with it, like vote. Maybe you can't think of just one word that starts with a C, but you can think of a phrase, like citizens have rights. Or maybe you can think of one word that starts with an R, like representatives. You also want to make sure if you hand draw it or do it digitally, that you include pictures. And then if you decide to do it digitally, you can make your acrostic right here on the slide. If you do it on paper, you can take a picture of it. Just a quick refresher, you would hit insert, image, come down to camera, take a picture of it, and then insert it right here. When you are finished with this, you're going to submit the slideshow, turn it back into the Google Classroom. Let me know if you have any questions.